Company name called Splunk. I've been here 3.5 years, so I've well and truly got over working for a company with this name, but where does it come from? Going from the word spelunking, it's an American term, basically going deep diving into caves. If we're an English company, we probably would have been called something like pothole, not quite as catchy for the marketing team. But what we're really about is exploring your data. And that bit of data that we know and use, that those come from maybe a BI background that we've known about, but actually how do we exploit that data that we don't use about, the unglamorous bit of data? As I'm talking, have a think about, I know you've all got one, your favorite log message. You must have one, so just have a think about it. Does it really look like nice, structured, tidy data that you can exploit quickly and easily? Or is it more a log? Which looks a little bit more messy. It's in motion. It keeps on changing. You have these pesky application developers that don't have any governance around what log message they write, and they write things like, hello, I'm here, great, this works, whoops, this doesn't really work. And you've got to then look at that and how can I harness that? But then it can be used for many different things. My favorite log line, it's kind of a confession here, is a HTTP web access log, because it will show me so many different things. Did it work? Did I get a 404 error when I'm going to go and buy my latest gadget? What did I buy? Can it be exploited for kind of customer experience? And maybe, is it secure? Is someone trying and compromising my web service? All from that one little bit of log message, by writing the right lens on top of it, I can get quite a lot of gold out of that data. There are more puns to come. So looking at this data, everyone here probably wanted to be a fireman, an astronaut, a soldier, or something like that, yet here we are looking at a log message. On that screen, out of that piece of data that some application developer wrote, I can pick out some really interesting nuggets of information. And that's what we're really interested here at Splunk. How can I get the right piece of information with the right lens and context to exploit that? And that doesn't necessarily have to come out of a log line. It could be data flowing over a network, on a message queue, something like that. I'm going to try something a bit different now and talk over a video. Think about your day in a life. So I've just moved house, and it was wonderful. The electrical survey failed. So in goes 32 data points around the house, a Nest thermostat, and all of those type of things. And think about all the data that's now being generated just here in the audience. We have laptops flowing. We've got Joe, Jack, Jill here getting a taxi. It's too far to walk to the train station in the morning on the way to work. He's interacting with a service. We want to make sure that is a really important journey. It needs to work. He jumps into the taxi. I now want to know as an insurer, well, for the budget, am I on budget? Looking at that. Then as an insurer, I want to be able to put a smart box inside of that phone and get real-time insights into how my taxi driver's doing. I want to maybe be able to give him flexible insurance policy that changes depending on his driving status. Is he hitting the accelerator too much? Is he braking too aggressively? Maybe as the taxi firm operator, I want to make sure that I'm giving my customers a good experience and my drivers are treating them with the care and respect that I had when I created my company there. I need to get hold of that data. I then think about my profile. When do I typically do things? We're all seeing kind of things like thermostats being stored in the cloud. How do I make sure I keep that assured, make it working, and keep it online? Now getting things like smart cities. Whenever we use apps like Waze, Google Maps, we're getting data fed from individual cars. We're getting data from traffic signals, data from traffic cameras being able to be exploited in many different ways. I get to work, I swipe in. All of this data is being generated all the time. And what you're trying to think about is, do I have a view that I want to find some information, and how can I get at that data? Maybe an elevator, I may be renting out office space. I want to know how many times does an elevator stop on each floor as an indicator of the health of that business on that floor. We have a company in Japan that does that to be able to help their renewal rates for offices. We then play with our thermostats. We can see it's an American video because it's certainly not 72 degrees centigrade, and Joe's now happy. So we're sat there, the most important thing in time, I'm drifting away, like probably about 1% of this audience have had enough of me, and you're thinking about your next holiday, and you have an error coming up on that screen. Well, that's not an IT error, that's a fail in that customer experience. So how does that team be able to quickly jump on top of that, fix a problem, and get Joe away on his holiday? Taking all the airplanes, all of the data that comes up, those are just flying data centers now. I want to make sure they stay online. I want to be able to do predictive maintenance as soon as that aircraft lands, so that when Joe gets to his destination, he's a really happy person. Okay. So machines are really talking. It's fascinating, the data that comes out of all these machines. So just apply a bit of imagination how you can kind of tackle that. You can get some really interesting results. And now for the most interesting slide you've seen all day. So here we go. Nothing more riveting than a graph like this. But what does this really represent to you? Have a think about it in your job context. And you got shown this graph. Think about your day job. What does this mean? Well, the way I look at it is these are customers that you may never get back. It is a failed IT interaction. That was actually an online retailer that last moment, the point of pure joy when you click buy, the last point before you can get out of that order was failing. And they didn't know why. They just had a drop in sales. And they actually used Splunk looking for an absence of data. Which web browsers are we no longer seeing coming through to help us diagnose that fault? So actually, data not being there can also be a good thing to help you. So how do we avoid being this wonderful group of gentlemen? Well, it's not easy. Data rarely looks like this. And even if it does look like this, someone's probably changed a schema about once or twice or 3 times over the year, so you have to normalize it anyway. It really looks really intertwined and messy. But to be able to allow our businesses, and we're all here because we're employed by a company or self-employed, trying to drive our company's services, we can only transform that by looking at data and applying the right logic and your own tacit knowledge with it. So with Splunk, we have this concept of a machine data fabric. So to do this, we'd be able to take any type of data from a machine, log generated, flowing over a network, from a command and control system in a factory. As long as it has a timestamp and we can turn it into a text, we can put it into this flexible platform. And it scales really nicely. We can go to splunk.com and download it and have a play with it. That same downloader that I'll use for a demo, or a demo you'll see later on today, scales up to a phenomenal amount of data. So we have customers now putting over a petabyte worth of data per day into our platform. Now, I'm not going to try and do the maths on this. I work in product management, so I only do PowerPoint for a living now. But take a petabyte and divide that by what? An average message size, 300 bytes, maybe a kilobyte at most, and you work out you've had trillions upon trillions of events flowing through that system. But the most important part about it is I want to make sure that I allow people to be able to search that information, but really get value out of it. There's no point storing data just for the sake of it. So we do that by having this turnkey solution that allows you to be able to ingest that data at scale, but most importantly, get value out of it fast. So to do this, we have IT data, IoT, all different types of data. We want to bring that in near real time. Be able to store that. Some of you may work for banks of regulatory requirements where you have to store that for 7 years. Now you start thinking about 3 petabytes a day for 7 years, that gets to a phenomenal amount of data. So you may be able to roll that on into a long-term data store. I then want to make sure I can access to that with ease. And the whole premise behind it is I want anyone to be able to access this data. But more importantly, I want to be able to look at the past to be able to predict what may happen in the future. And do all of this from a single pane of glass. The real interesting part comes from it is different lenses on that same piece of data. So have a think about your business unit and the data that you capture at the moment and what else could you do with that. So if I was a retailer and I'm capturing IT information, well, what is an IT event to a call to a database server? Well, that may be a call to someone to purchase a product. If I then put a dollar value against it, and again, I'm showing I work for an American company, a pound value to it, I can start to look at maybe the health of the business and the importance of that service, the database service that I'm providing. So how am I going to then make sure I triage the right services, the focus I want to put in for my next year's plan? Some of you may be going through your next calendar year planning sessions, and where do you want to put resources? Well, actually understanding the amounts services get consumed and then dollar values against it helps you then prioritize. The most important part about it is it allows you to responsively move at market speed, marrying up those two things, the application developers and the app developers, along with those business leaders on the other side. So as I roll out new services, I want to be able to look at, is there a market launch? Is the feature actually being used? Are people looking at that page? What's their journey through that? But also with the context of, Does it stay secure? It rarely goes by a few days without some data breach being mentioned. We only had last week a big denial of service attack that took down a lot of the huge corporations in the US. So that security context also has a business impact. It also has an IT operations impact. So being able to get to the right information to learn how that's affecting you both internally and externally becomes absolutely critical. So let's look for some examples. So everyone thinks that knows Splunk as the IT monitoring company. So I thought planes, trains, and automobiles. So most of this audience has probably gone through Gatwick Airport at one time in their lives. So Gatwick Airport in 2015 adopted Splunk Cloud, our software as a service offering, to be able to allow them to monitor the entire airport. So they're the largest single runway airport in the world, and they're taking data from airport gates, boarding passes, X-ray, travel, and be able to use that to get the health of the airport. So something as innocuous as a tannoy system doesn't seem that important. But if that tannoy system fails in one zone, passengers may not hear about updates, which means you're going to get passengers maybe noticing on their phone, flooding a gate, which means I can't get people through security, which means I won't get people onto the flight, which means I'm now going to have to take all those bags off. I'm going to have to rebook people onto new flights. And I've actually just caused a huge backlog of extra work that I could have avoided by just monitoring this little tannoy system sat up there in the corner of a room. So being able to think about the impact of things, I can take very small wins and be able to prove some great value there. So they're actually looking at the motorway coming into Gatwick, the M26, I'm going to guess at a punt, something like that. And they take the traffic management cameras there. What they're looking for is the metadata from the cameras. How fast is that traffic flowing through that system? By taking that metadata, they can compare using Splunk, is that more or less than the average period for this time? If it's slower, they might look at their check-in staff and say, let's start pulling people off the check-in desks, because we know as soon as that clears, we want everyone on check-in so we can get these people through the gates as fast as possible. So taking that little tiny bit of log messages and applying that business impact allows them to really get there. And the most important part then was the chief exec had an Apple Watch, and so someone, young enterprising chap in IT, decided to write an app for him to justify his purchase to his wife. Much more interesting, I was talking about being policemen's astronauts and things like that. So the F-35, I was actually talking to someone in the audience here earlier today about getting data off, so Alice data. These are flying airframes. So every F-35 kind of ripping through the sky is having its data generated and splunked. So as that comes down, the most important thing about it, they can make sure that is maintained. The interesting thing about these, a lot of them are privately contracted airframes. And the local air forces don't always own them, and they just buy flying hours. So that company has a risk profile with these. They're providing an hour on that plane. They need to make sure that stays up. That matters to their business. So every single last piece of that data that I can capture from the airframe, I need to be able to exploit to minimize my risk. The most amazing one here, trains. So in the US, you clearly don't have these in Britain, but some of these trains are about 1.5 miles long with about 400 feet of slack. So just thinking about when that goes over a hill, when half of that train's over a hill, you can pretty much take your foot off the accelerator and happy days, you're rolling downwards. But that takes a lot of fuel and a lot of power. These are 20,000-ton trains. So they take all of that telemetry off the train from third-party providers. So they don't always own that data. They get sent data by different providers, so that comes in lots of different forms, and they have to quickly turn around reporting there. And this is the one our marketing department loves because they managed to save over $1 billion. They wanted to publish an ROI figure, but that's getting a little bit silly there. But what you're finding is by taking all these different pieces of data and applying it to a problem, they can have a look at fuel savings, driver efficiencies, but not to tell the drivers they're doing something wrong. They give the drivers self-service access to this information to be able to let them be inquisitive about their driving habits so they can start learning, being proactive there, so democratizing that data. Volkswagen, smart cars, especially here in Europe and Germany, we're getting more and more smart cars coming out of there. Being able to take every little bit of that sensor, maybe alleviate the pain will my electric battery last all the way to work? And be able to take that data, apply some predictive algorithms to be able to help with that. And then finally, the last customer example I'll talk about here is Shazam. So again, a completely non-IT use case. Every time someone Shazams, so we're now moving into Shazam adverts. The Shazam are playing kind of hidden music around stores, so you can actually Shazam, and that will deliver some content to you. They're using that to be able to in real time say, as I change something, are users picking up on it? What is the most interesting thing about this? They're now getting to the point where they can predict the next number one. I think it's something like 20 to 30 days out, even to the most interesting part of a song, and look at, how can we then exploit that information, provide a better service to our customers? So how do we go about it? It can seem quite daunting. We've got some really interesting use cases, but you're sat there saying, I've got a bit of software. I think I know what data I want to do. Where do I go next? Well, I was thinking about some of the lessons learned over my time as a data consultant. The most important parts are your building blocks of your application. So taking a really standard web tier operations. We have web operations, application, and maybe database administration. Those are all critically important. And each one of those, the communities of interest, should have specific KPIs and dashboards to be able to let them run their business unit. But most importantly, we want to have cross-cutting KPIs across all of those to be able to look at some business transactions, KPIs, and dashboarding to give us warning that something is right and be able to interrogate that. Where would I start to do this? Well, actually, another very unglamorous place is middleware. Middleware is a really interesting part to start to capture this information. The place that I can get most flows above and below the line from a web tier down to database server and back, I can look at, well, what was the average response time between those two layers? So thinking about when you take a data source, what's going to get you the most amount of impact for what you do? And then how do you operate within that? What you really want is to set up these kind of canary alerts. You know, machine learning, deep learning, all of these type of stuff, they're really interesting, but what they are is an indicator that something is not right. So how can I set up that indicator to say, hey, James, something's not right, send me an alert, and let's have a look at it. You know, thumbs down, something's gone wrong, your traditional red. When it gets there, do I have some scripts to help collect additional data? So imagine a database server's gone wrong. I can create a network script that says, now, let's go and capture every single piece of traffic going between those 2 points for the next 30 minutes to help me troubleshoot this information. And then importantly, that war room scenario. So I can get both technical data experts and domain expertise together in the same room, especially when you get things like an F-35. You're not going to have one person that can query all the data that understands the ins and outs of a control system together. So how do I get these people and collaborate together and be able to quickly diagnose a problem? And most importantly, take that information and add that to continuous improvement so the next time it happens, I'm there and ready. So doing this, I can actually do things like detect potential failed customer interactions, be an IT failure, a security failure, something like that. And most importantly, do something about it. Not have this concept of kind of vanity metrics. It's really interesting, the amount of projects that start up, you get a very flexible, powerful tool, and you find that you're collecting metrics, you're not quite knowing why you're collecting them, they just seem interesting. To be able to get that actionable insight that allows you to do something with. And this is where we found our best projects. It's where we really, at the beginning, outline, these are the metrics I need, and if I make a decision, I can make a positive decision. It may be to do nothing, but these are the things I want to look at. And be able to do this in real time. You know, there's two kind of concepts, schema on write, whereas Splunk is a schema on read. So I just ingest the data. I don't think about how I want to analyze it later. I can bring that schema out on the fly at search time. I have truly no schema that I want to run against, just the type of data that I'm searching at, which then allows me to establish a culture of continuous improvement on my entire suite and really get people understanding the importance of their data in context of other business units. And really this concept of the different lenses into the same data. So if I was in business operations, I may be looking at things like Net Promoter Score. Are my customers happy? We've all phoned a call center and had a very disgruntled feeling afterwards. If I can take that enterprise feedback management, when you get the text, how was your experience? And you put 1, and it goes back. Well, I can actually now correlate with Splunk. I got a 1 from this customer. what was happening in my data center at the time. People weren't happy. I start to correlate those two things together and really find out, is an IT failure costing me business? But when this starts to take off, this person becomes really popular. We've probably all seen it, and they become an advocate and a complete champion. They're happy, they'll start talking and singing the praises of whatever technology platform they've had success with. And you get a sense of excitement starts to build. All these type of metrics, and you get this huge backlog of information. And that first phase accelerates really, really quickly and great of success. But then suddenly you get overwhelmed with all of these kind of requests for information. So how do you keep the momentum going? And those of you here that have a physics background will notice the Freudian slip with this slide. So my wife has a physics background, so why are you showing this one? It's like, well, it shows momentum. She said, no, it doesn't. It shows someone sat on a desk with a great idea, disrupting people that are completely at peace. All I'm doing is generating noise and hot energy, and eventually the whole thing will fizzle out. So there may be another way of thinking about that slide there. So I really thank my wife for that on her positive view of the world. So what we really want to do is bring these pieces together, and it really starts at this kind of business leader. And now that doesn't mean a line of business. You may be an IT manager with responsibility to deliver an application, a database service, a service of some guise to support something. So what are your opportunities there? What is your most important thing? How do you continually deliver this to market? And your market might not be the general public. It may be an internal team. You may be a DBA, and your market are the app team above you. How do you think about their needs and being able to monitor the correct metrics with continuous improvement to be able to push that forwards? Be able to then pivot on different pieces of information with continuous insights. The most important part about that was that schema on read notion. As I'm bringing all these wonderful, glamorous data sources in, I don't really know quite the exact thing I may want to interrogate it with up front. I just know it's useful. So being able to change that view as I learn and I build my worldly knowledge up about my domain problem, I can pivot and change to then reassess those new opportunities and monitor and keep on going there. And the most important part about it, whilst I'm doing this, I can keep the auditors happy by proving I'm capturing all of that information and giving them insight into everything that I'm doing. So in all of our jobs, we think about how do I earn a seat at that table at that next meeting that I feel I should be at? I may be a chief executive that's thinking my seat at the table is showing I'm a successful public company. I may be someone like myself, I'm a product manager. So how do I prove that I'm building the right foundations to make Splunk and my business area be disruptive? Well, this really comes from that strong IT data foundation that allows me to capture the right information with the confidence that when I have a problem, I can do some root cause analysis and really get to the bottom of that. So I can get those canary scripts running. I can get that next first line kind of reaction going and build up that war room scenario so I can quickly get to the end of that resolution. No longer do I have those huge war rooms with the head of networks, the head of database, the head of apps, the head of the search software, all saying to the people in networks it's the network's fault, then a database, then eventually you come down to the final problem. That continuous, holistic environment. Being able to then continuously improve on everything I do. When I release a new bit of software, was that a positive thing? Did we actually improve our environment? And how do I do that? And then be able to commercialize that. So protect your kind of premium of what you're doing, the service you as a person you're employed to be able to push to the people that you work with, to enable you really to become disruptive, either in the marketplace or within yourself, within your organization. So that data fabric journey. So quite quickly, we onboard more and more data sources. The amount of data that comes through increases. We get those quick wins. We then get to that tipping point where you're not quite sure where to go next. The most important people in your organization are your people. They know your business. They have that tacit and implicit knowledge. We find it really successful to run those hackathons saying, here's some data, have a day, what can you do with it? What ideas do you have to help us improve the services that we are providing internally and externally? And then start to use things like that to give a roadmap to where to go for next. So with the right IT foundation and the right culture, and the most important part about this culture, thinking there that I don't have a stupid question. I can interrogate that that piece of information, I can be creative and come up with new ideas and concepts with ease. It is not a big program that I'm now going to have to run. With the right commercial intensity and market speed to keep you relevant within your role and your marketplace and your company, with the resources of an enterprise, gives you the agility of a startup. So no matter what size of organization you are, you can be agile and respond and react to where you want to go next. So before I open the floor to any questions, a much better talk, because it provides food, is happening at 4:30. So we're going to show you using machine learning on how to predict to feed hungry people. Be there early if you do want a donut. That will be in seminar room 2 at 4:30. And then tomorrow, taking the other side of this, and how do you monitor customer experience in real time? Truly look at not working on last month's data in kind of an old traditional BI world. How do I look at the here and now when I launch a new campaign? How's that effective? So are there any questions from the floor? Silence with a stern reply. Well, hopefully that means I've been incredibly informative and you're all waiting to be fed at 4:30. That session will look at how we take machine data, apply arbitrary algorithms to it, and most importantly, be able to operationalize the result, get some that actionable insight to do something next with. So thank you very much.